my pastoral leadership, Pastor Blankenship, Pastor Bemfree, Pastor Clay. I'd especially like to thank my youth staff, Brother Brown, Brother Blair, and last but definitely not least, Pastor Towns. He's much more than just a youth pastor to me. He's done so much. My opening verse would be Exodus chapter 32, verses 4 through 5. And again, I would just like to thank our leadership because we have great leadership. We are blessed with having leadership like the leadership we have. To give some background to this, right before this, the people of Israel went up to Aaron and asked him to build a golden calf. They asked him to build an idol, and he did not refuse. And he received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, "These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow is the feast to the Lord." If I had a title for this, it would be, "Are you going to be a Judas or a Paul?" You may be seated. So people came up to Aaron to build this idol, and he did so. He created something that was sinful, was ungodly. And then they had the audacity to say that this is what saved us. And they created an altar for this idol and worshiped this idol. Before I get any further, just think about it. Think. These people were bound and slaves in Egypt. And the only person or God that ever gave them any attention was God. The only thing that ever gave them any attention was God. And he freed them from bondage that looked like it was eternal. It looked like there was no escape from it. And he freed them. And then they go back and say, well, he's not our God. This calf that we just created, that we know with our hands, was made by us. This is our God. And Aaron committed a great sin. Aaron, I don't know what he was thinking while he did this, but in Exodus chapter 28, verse 35, just a few chapters before, up in the mountain while all this is going on, is Moses talking to God. And it says, "And it shall be upon Aaron to minister, and his sound shall be heard when he goeth in unto the holy place before the Lord, and when he cometh out, that he die not." There are times in our lives where we are being very sinful. I think everyone has been there, where they've just been constantly sinning, and it just feels like there's no hope. It feels like God can't forgive this. How is he gonna want me to minister after the sin that I just committed? The sin. See, while Aaron was sinning this sin, he was committing this sin. He was creating a golden calf. At that very moment, God was prophesying over him. There's a whole chapter in the Bible dedicated to just what Aaron was going to wear as a high priest. While all this is going on, Aaron is committing this sin. While Aaron was committing a sin, God was planning his future. There is a future past our sin. Your sin is not greater than God's grace. And your sin is definitely not greater than God's blood. Whenever there's sin, there's also forgiveness around the corner. But don't give up and turn around right back to that sin. God will forgive you. But Exodus 32:33 says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Whosoever has sinned against me, him I will blot out of my book." It does not mean that if you sin once, you're out of his book of life. That's not what that means. But if he continually gives you forgiveness, and you're constantly running back to that same sin without really any real means to serve God, what does it say? You can't keep sinning and keep being rebellious against God and expect everything to be all right. Because it's not once saved, always saved. God gives you forgiveness so you can turn your life around. And just think about Judas and Paul. See, Judas was called to be a disciple, one of the first 12, one of the main 12 disciples that God had. He had a calling on his life, one of the founders of pretty much the modern church. And he committed a great sin, and I'm pretty sure all he felt was guilt. And God would have made a way for him to get past that guilt. God will always forgive you, and you will have, I'm not going to say punishment, but you will always suffer consequences for your choices. So you can still be called and still minister, but you will suffer consequences. But he could have stayed living, and he could have still been a disciple, but he decided to commit suicide. Whereas in Paul's end, Paul he murdered Christians, he killed Christians. He was the person that every Christian despised. And yet God gave him forgiveness, and he took that forgiveness and went on to become the great man. He wrote just about half of the New Testament, I believe. Jesus did not come down here for the people that are perfect. He came here for the broken. And, Aaron, you may feel like there's no future after your sin. And you may feel like that you're calling to minister, or anything that's going on in your life, God won't look past it. In Exodus chapter 40, verse 13, this is after all that stuff went on. And thou shalt put upon Aaron the holy garments, and anoint him and sanctify him, that he may minister unto me in the priest office. God looked past his sin. God forgave him and looked past him and past his sin, and he was the high priest of Israel. He was still the high priest of Israel. God is always going to look past our sin as long as we're willing to turn away from it. And just don't constantly be running back to your sin. God does not care about our past. He will remember it, but he will not judge you based on it. He will not do things to punish you based on your past. So just remember, there is always a future after sin. Be blessed.